The Last Day of Death Row Inmate, Cameron Todd Willingham, innocent man executed? Hello friends, and welcome back. Tonight, we revisit one of the most haunting and controversial true crime stories in modern American history, a case that has shaken the very foundation of our justice system. In December 1991, a devastating house fire in Corsicana, Texas, claimed the lives of 3 young children. Their father, Cameron Todd Willingham, was soon accused of setting the blaze deliberately. The trial that followed painted him as a cold and heartless man, using evidence that, at the time, seemed conclusive. But years later, scientific advances would challenge almost every detail the prosecution relied on. Was this truly an act of unspeakable evil, or the tragic result of a deadly accident misread as a crime? As we walk through his final 24 hours and the years of doubt that preceded them, prepare for a story where every fact feels like it could turn the case upside down. Dear friends, Cameron Todd Willingham's story is as chilling as it is complicated. Born in 1968 in Oklahoma, Willingham grew up in a working-class family and had his share of troubles from an early age. Minor run-ins with the law, a reputation for a quick temper, and a lifestyle that sometimes brushed against the edges of legality. But in 1991, he was living in Corsicana, Texas, with his wife, Stacy, and their 3 children, Amber, just 2 years old, and the 1-year-old twins, Carmen and Cameron. It was an ordinary holiday season until December 23, when an unimaginable tragedy struck. That morning, a fire broke out in the small family home. Stacy had left to do some Christmas shopping, and Willingham was asleep when the flames erupted. Neighbors recalled hearing screams and seeing smoke pouring from the windows. Willingham tried desperately to re-enter the burning home, but the intense heat and smoke forced him back. Despite the fire department's quick arrival, the 3 children did not survive. The investigation began immediately. Fire investigators at the time were trained in methods now considered outdated and unscientific. They pointed to burn patterns on the floor, the so-called pour marks, and certain shapes in the debris as signs of accelerants, indicators of arson under the forensic thinking of that era. They also noted broken windows and Willingham's demeanor as suspicious. Within weeks, the case shifted from a tragic accident to a criminal investigation. Prosecutors painted a disturbing portrait of Willingham as a man who valued his freedom over his children, citing his tattoos, musical tastes, and past behavior as signs of a dangerous personality. Witnesses testified that he had shown little emotion after the fire, and jailhouse informants claimed he had confessed to setting it intentionally. The narrative was compelling, and in 1992, a jury found him guilty of capital murder. He was sentenced to death. For years, Willingham maintained his innocence, insisting the fire was accidental, but appeals after appeals failed, largely because the same fire evidence that convicted him was still accepted as valid. The case might have ended there, just another tragic entry in the annals of death row, if not for a slow but seismic shift in the science of fire investigation. By the early 2000s, advances in fire forensics began challenging the old methods. Experts found that many of the signs investigators once associated with arson could occur naturally in accidental fires. In 2004, just weeks before Willingham's scheduled execution, his defense team presented a new report from Gerald Hurst, a respected fire scientist who concluded there was no credible evidence of arson. He stated that every supposed sign of deliberate ignition had a logical, accidental explanation. Despite this, Texas authorities declined to halt the execution. The night before his death, Willingham spoke with his parents and a few close friends. Guards described him as calm but frustrated, deeply aware that he was running out of time. He repeated his innocence over and over, not just as a plea, but as if trying to etch it permanently into the record before his voice was silenced. On the morning of February 17, 2004, Willingham was escorted to the death chamber in Huntsville, Texas. Witnesses reported that he looked directly at his ex-wife Stacy and told her he had not harmed their children. His last words were defiant and emotional, a final rejection of the crime for which he had been condemned. Minutes later, the lethal injection took effect, and he was pronounced dead. The story, however, didn't end there. In the years following his execution, several independent reviews of the case were conducted. The Texas Forensic Science Commission, among others, examined the fire investigation and concluded that the original evidence used against Willingham was deeply flawed. Even some of the state's own experts admitted that the science had advanced to the point where the 1992 conclusions could no longer be supported. One of the most controversial aspects of the case was the jailhouse informant, who later recanted parts of his testimony, claiming he had been pressured to lie in exchange for favorable treatment. Combined with the discredited fire evidence, this added weight to the possibility that an innocent man had been executed. Willingham's case became a flashpoint in the debate over the death penalty, particularly in situations where forensic science evolves after a conviction. Supporters of his innocence argued that Texas had committed a grave injustice, while others maintained that, despite the flaws in the fire evidence, circumstantial factors still pointed to his guilt. The state has never formally acknowledged wrongdoing, but the shadow cast by the case has influenced conversations about capital punishment for years. In the broader picture, Willingham's execution stands as a stark example of how justice can be shaped and potentially distorted by the limits of scientific knowledge at a given time. In the 1990s, investigators believed they were following reliable methods. By the 2000s, those methods were being dismantled by new research, leaving cases like Willingham's in a dangerous gray area. To this day, the case continues to divide public opinion. Documentaries, investigative reports, and books have dissected every aspect, from the fire scene to the courtroom drama to the political pressures surrounding his appeals. Some see Willingham as a symbol of fatal flaws in the justice system, while others believe the circumstantial evidence and personal history still justify the verdict. What's undeniable is the human cost. 3 children lost their lives in a horrific fire, and their memory remains at the heart of the tragedy. Whether Willingham was their killer or another victim of circumstance is a question that may never be fully resolved. But his final 24 hours serve as a chilling reminder that the truth in such cases is not always as clear as the headlines make it seem. And so, friends, the story of Cameron Todd Willingham lingers, not only as a chapter in Texas death row history, but as a cautionary tale about the irreversible nature of capital punishment in a world where certainty can sometimes prove elusive. His final moments, spent insisting on his innocence, continue to echo through courtrooms, forensic labs, and living rooms across the country, forcing us to ask, if science evolves, how many more verdicts from the past might not withstand the light of the present? Cameron Todd Willingham's final day was marked by defiance, frustration, and an unshakable claim of innocence. Whether one believes he was a grieving father wrongfully condemned or a man hiding behind denial, his case has become one of the most debated in American criminal history. The fire that took his children's lives was unquestionable, but the question of intent has only grown murkier with time. Advances in forensic science have dismantled much of the evidence once considered ironclad, leaving a haunting uncertainty in its wake. For many, Willingham's execution stands as a cautionary tale about the dangers of irreversible punishment in a system that can evolve and, at times, admit its own mistakes too late. His story forces us to confront a chilling reality. Once the sentence is carried out, there's no turning back, even if the truth reveals itself years later, in the ashes of what we thought we knew.